Let's talk about a very topical issue at a time when India and China tensions have de-escalated after a weeks-long standoff at Doklam. India is looking up to China to give a fillip to its economy. There are 67 references to China and Chinese in the 3-year action agenda prepared by think tank NITI Ayog. The agenda released by Finance Minister Arun Jaitley last week not only hails and acknowledges China's economic muscle, but also highlights how India comes up short. There are more reasons for it too. China is world's second biggest economy and has a lot going for it. NITI Ayog has also taken a note of it, ranging from special economic zones to job creation, from world-class universities to modern cities, from communication and IT to software in China. The Shenzhen model of urbanization could inspire smart cities. Shenzhen used to be an unremarkable town in China until 40 years ago, but an urbanization push transformed it into a megacity, one of China's wealthiest. Now, highlighting the role exports play in increasing productivity, employment and wages, the document says there are only 4 developing countries, China, Taiwan, Singapore and South Korea, that successfully transformed themselves within 3 decades. But China, with a population similar to India, is most comparable. So China has inspired NITI Ayog, the think tank for India development. India is looking up to China for the development. There have been 67 references to China in this 3-year action plan. And Agenda 2017 and 18, as it is known, is prepared by NITI Ayog, the think tank of Government of India. And NITI Ayog is India's government think tank, as we all know. The agenda has been released by FM Arun Jaitley last week. Agenda hails China's economic muscle. They are looking forward to China for many growth opportunities. Agenda also highlights where India lacks as far as policies and execution is concerned. China, as we all know, is world's second biggest economy. And India can learn from China, special economic zones for growth. That has been a very successful model, though there have been doubts which have been raised from now and then. China has world-class universities and modern cities too. China is powerhouse in communication and information technology, and that's what somewhere India also needs to learn from China on all these aspects. The Shenzhen model of urbanization has inspired smart cities in China. And Shenzhen used to be an unremarkable town until 40 years ago. That's what India is also learning from China. How feasible and good it will be, that will be known later on only. And to talk more about India-China trade practices, how NITI Ayog is inspired by China, I am joined by Dr. Suvro Amal Datta, foreign analyst and economist. Good evening to you, first of all, Mr. Datta.
Thank you.
So we compare India and China almost on every basis, but now here we are looking forward to NITI Ayog is looking forward to China growth model for India growth model. How feasible is that to apply all those rules that are applicable in China to India?
There is a basic fundamental difference between the Chinese growth model and the Indian growth story. We need to realize and we need to understand that China is an authoritarian country and it's a single party rule. India is a multi-party democracy and it's not an authoritarian regime. If we really have to implement the Chinese growth story, then we have to learn from the doctrine of Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong was the person who had actually united China after the Red Army Revolution of 1948. There are 3 stages of that, of the Mao Zedong doctrine. The first stage was in relation to exporting cheap Chinese labor across the world, which was like laborers from China were exported throughout the world, whether it was in Southeast Asia, East Asia, Africa, or in the New World. In relation to Canada, United States of America, and for that matter, even in Europe. The second phase of that, which was somewhere between the decade of 1960s and early 70s, in that decade, what China did was it started emphasizing a lot on the domestic economies of those countries. And it actually, exported Chinese entrepreneurs in the second stage and Chinese investors in the second stage so that they could take over the economy of those countries. in a direct or an indirect basis.
Right.
And in the last stage, what happened was like the Chinese diaspora, which was there in East Africa or in Europe or in Southeast Asia or East Asia, they started repatriating dollars and hard currencies back to China by the Chinese diaspora. So that is what is the Mao Zedong model is all about. Second is like when China actually controlled the economy of those countries, they also started influencing the politics of those countries. As a result of it was like China was able to make these economies a kind of a vassal state kind of a thing, and that's why we have the notion of dumping and everything, you know, in relation to Chinese goods. Now, in the Indian scenario, that is not possible because of this fundamental difference that we are a democratic country, they are not a democratic country.
Absolutely.
Second thing is like, yes, there are certain aspects in relation to Chinese economy from which we can learn. One is especially in relation to the development of the smart cities, which we are talking about so much here in India. Yes, we need to learn as to how they develop the smart cities. Second is in relation to delivery at the right moment, at the right quarter. China has been successful because there has been a pro-time kind of an approach that within the deadline you need to deliver anyhow by hook or by crook. In the Indian case, in most of the scenarios, we have failed on that. We have failed because of policy paralysis. We have failed because of lack of governance. Now, when an investor invests in a country, he expects that you should actually give him that kind of an healthy environment so that he is able to, he is able to generate his resources also. And at the same time, he is also able to take back the resources which he wants, So any private investor would want in the profit share. But in the Indian case, in most of the projects which we have handled so far, whether the government projects or the private projects as such, there has been a delay in relation to time. So that's one thing which we have to understand. And just one small thing which I want to add up here is in relation to the special economic zone which we are talking about now. The UPA government had also tried the same model, but it had tried across the length and breadth of the country, and it turned out to be a disaster.
Mr. Datta, I will come back to Mr. Datta. In the meantime, we can give a glimpse of what kind of trade practices India and where do they stand when it comes to trade. Let's tell our viewers that India and China stand nowhere near when it comes to business and economy. So if you look at out of the world merchandise exports worth $16 trillion in 2015, China accounted for around 14% of these exports. But where do India stand? India stands only, it's about 1.5% share when it comes to total exports as far as global exports are concerned. So we just want to give a glimpse to the viewers. Where do we stand when it comes to exports as far as India and China are concerned? So we can have a comparison between India and China. We can go on comparing India and China because it is important to compare India and China. But after this standoff, what is happening? India is taking aim at China through businesses. Power grid, telecom, the rules have been tightened in those sectors. India is tightening rules for business entering sensitive sectors. That's one fallout of Doklam standoff, that and disengagement we saw today. But India has taken a lesson from over there that they are having less and less dependency on China businesses. Harbin Electric, Dongfang, Shanghai Electric, they are engaged in Indian power businesses. There are many companies that are engaged in such kind of business, and India has taken a cue from the standoff that it should not allow businesses to become heavy, the Chinese businesses to become heavy in India. So India is considering a report prepared by Central Electricity Authority. Report says that new conditions for firms bidding for power transmissions should be tightened. That's what is said by India report, and that's what fallout of Doklam so far. We should also compare trade more widely between India and China. Look at from the perspective of import and export. The trade comparison in 2013 and 14, India's imports from China were $51 billion and exports to China were from just $14.8 billion. Look at the figures over there as well, and there is a huge trade gap when it comes to figures as far as trade is concerned. Moving on to discussion further with you, Mr. Datta, I would like to ask you, first of all, what are the sectors you think India should work immediately so that it can come closer to China or become some kind of big power in the world? What are the main sectors you think?
See, we really have to look into the power sector of the country as such, and also in relation to the roadways, airways and railways. There has to be quick and quantum expansion in relation to roadways, airways and railways in India, And thankfully, after the change of regime of 2014, these areas have been the prime focus as such, and we are seeing rapid development in relation to roadways, airways and railways here in India. Second is also in relation to water management of the inland waterways. That is something which we have to really focus on. If you look into China, most of the rivers are connected with each other, and the waterway system in inland China is superb. They have the connectivity right from Shanghai to Lhasa through inland waterways. That is something which we have to look into. Okay. Shipbuilding is another area where we need to look. Tourism, yes, definitely, and horticulture and agricultural sector. These are the main areas where there has to be a prime focus.
Okay, we'll tell our viewers what else is happening. And what about Asia? Indian cities in Asia are set to expand the most across the region, with growth speeding up from the past 5 years. According to a new study from Oxford Economics, the study has ranked Asia's 30 largest cities with financial and business services projected to be fastest growing sector in India. Delhi's dominance in this industry will lead to higher growth and higher incomes. But China's expansion will slow down going forward, although the largest 5 cities will still be recording growth rates of 6% or more. So India and China, they are the highest growing cities in the world, but Japan and Taiwan also come there. So Asia growth over the next 5 years looks like this, that Indian cities will see the fastest growth in Asia. Indian cities set to expand the most across Asia when it comes to economic growth. The financial and business services are the fastest growing sectors in India. And China's expansion will slow going forward. The Japanese cities, though, are likely to remain at the bottom. That's one big, we can say, that point out of this survey, that Japanese cities will be at the bottom. Main reason is that Japan is facing a challenging demographic outlook. Tianjin in China is forecast to clock the fastest growth in China. There are many reasons for this. First is that it has a large manufacturing base and busy airports too. And Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh City is the only non-Indian city in the top 5.